Okay, everyone, thank you for coming tonight to our first philosophy intersections of the fall semester. Tonight, Dr. Don Seastrom, professor of art, and myself, Dr. Anthony McCauley, will be presenting Wings Too Weak, Authentic Knowledge in Dante's Divine Comedy. And I'm going to just start us off by handing it over to Dr. Seastrom.
Thank you so much. Like most people, I was first introduced to the Divine Comedy when I was in high school. Yes, we actually had literature when I was in high school. As is true in most cases, what we read was the Inferno. And I can remember thinking that this was a little unsatisfying, and I wasn't really sure why. Then later, when I was doing my doctoral studies, I had the opportunity of doing a course on the entire comedy. I had the good fortune of being able to work with Joseph Meeker and John Talmadge, who are both Dantean scholars and speak fluent Italian. Joseph Meeker is in fact the great-grandson of the person who founded Meeker, Colorado. In considering the understanding of the Divine Comedy, one thing that I want you to understand, this is not going to be a literary review, because this is in fact sum total of the work. A bit too large to go through on a very in-depth basis. But I did want to give you some information on Dante and how this particular work came about. Dante was born in 1265. Very little is known about his formal education, or whether in fact there was a level of formal education. But during his life, there certainly would have been an experience for him to become familiar with the Dominicans, who were centered in Florence in Santa Maria Novella, the Augustinians, who were centered in Santa Spiritu, and the Franciscans in Santa Croce. If you know Florence at all, these are three major churches in the area. People will ask, why are there these major churches in Florence? Well, at this time, with these particular individuals, this was as much a community of scholars, of educators, as they were centers of religious consideration. If you know anything about Catholicism, you would know that these groups did not get along very well. Also, Dante most likely would have known about the developments that were going on in Paris at the time, which dealt with a re-emergence of Aristotelian thought. There were two branches, two concepts that were being presented. One saw human reason, independent of faith and grace, as having sufficient force to find God. The second, the more radical, believed that human reason was sufficient means of attaining happiness, a philosophy completely independent of theology. Dante and his family were not a real major force in Florentine politics, but he was involved in Florentine politics and was involved in the exiling of certain individuals from Florence. Well, in 1302, because of his activities, he and his family were exiled from Florence. It was during this exile that the comedy was written, and in his publishing of it, it was the comedy. It was not the Divine Comedy. The term the Divine Comedy did not come about until 1555, when an edition of the entire work was published in Venice. It then carried the term the Divine Comedy. Dante died in 1321 in Ravenna, Italy. That's where he's buried. A lot of people think he's buried in Florence because there's a nice sculpture of him outside of Santa Croce, but he's not. On several occasions over the past few hundred years, Florence has asked for his remains to be returned. Ravenna says no. So if you want to find Dante, you've got to go to Ravenna. In looking at the Divine Comedy, what I was going to focus in on are three concepts: vision, perception, and interpretation, particularly in relationship to the concept of cosmos and chaos. Chaos is often defined as being disorder, confusion, bedlam, turmoil. Cosmos, on the other hand, is order and understanding. Dante, like Orpheus's search for Eurydice, takes him on a physical journey into the metaphysical. Therefore, all aspects of vision, perception, and interpretation must be considered from the perspective of an altered state of awareness. At the beginning of the story, Dante finds himself in a wood. He is in a state of confusion. He's not sure where he is. He is only aware that he has lost a path. Now, in studying this, I found it very interesting that in some classical literature, in a good deal of medieval literature, dreams that take place at daybreak are those which come true. So here you have the setting. This begins at daybreak. Dante could have set this at any particular time. He sets it at daybreak. So is this a dream or is it an actual occurrence? It's irrelevant. It's a story. I've often wondered why this did not become a religious text. Once I went and started preparing for this, it became quite apparent to me that this is a statement of philosophy and a statement of politics, and not a religious concept. Dante is in a state of chaos. Dante is in a state of confusion. Who shows up? Virgil. Virgil is identified as classical reasoning, classical wisdom. And Virgil offers to lead Dante through a series of realms. From the onset, one of the most important questions posed in these volumes is the nature of authentic understanding versus simply knowing. In Cantos 3, we find the very first one of these particular quandaries. This is the inscription above the gate of the Inferno. It reads, "Through me the way into the suffering city. Through me the way to eternal pain. Through me the way that runs amongst the lost. Justice urged my higher artificer." Artificer is one who builds something. "My maker was divine authority, the highest wisdom, and primal love. Before me nothing but eternal things were made, and I endure eternally. Abandon every hope who enter here." Dante's confused. Dante knows what the thing says, he does not understand. He says, "These words, their aspect were obscure. I read, inscribed above a gate, and I said, Master, their meaning is difficult for me, and he to me as one who comprehends. Here one must leave behind all hesitation. Here every cowardice must meet its death. For we have reached the place of which I spoke. We will see the miserable people, those who have lost the good of the intellect." As readers, we also know what the inscription says. But there is a question. How is it that the Inferno is created from the highest wisdom, from primal love? What is the implication of the words, abandon every hope who enter here? Is this a statement of punishment and a call to despair? Although the inscription may seem to elicit despair, it does so only if we interpret the concept of hope in one way. At this point in the comedy, that might be the only conclusion. But like the comedy itself, the concept of hope, as expressed in the inscription, cannot be understood until the whole work is completed. The journey must be finished, or we are left with only limited, incomplete, and flawed perspectives. A failure both of perception and interpretation. Now, because sin is often associated with concepts of hell, in this case the inferno, that is to say, sin is often read into the description of the inscription on the gate. However, in the inscription, nor anywhere else, is the word sin ever used. Through me, the way that runs amongst the lost. Not the damned, not the sinful, but the lost. And what is it that they have lost? The good of the intellect. The word sin does not enter the poem or our interpretation until it is uttered by Virgil in his description of the condition of the shades, not souls but shades, encountered in limbo. Sin as a concept is expressed not by the divine authority, the highest wisdom, primal love, but by one of the shades who is himself, Virgil, locked in limbo. In this way, the why a shade is placed in limbo, or any other part of the inferno, is first presented not by a divine authority, but by one of its inhabitants. The shades in limbo are without sin, yet they acknowledge having been placed in their location by reason of external authority. Is this justice articulated in the inscription? What's just about those without sin being relegated to limbo and kept out of paradise? Virgil's explanation: they remain located in limbo and refuse to question authority. This is a reoccurring theme of all of the shades located in the inferno. The belief that an outside authority has determined their fate. The question: is this an authentic authority or merely the interpretation of authority? The Inferno offers one answer. Purgatorio offers somewhat different answer. In Paradiso, a truly revolutionary and revelatory reply. Continuing on past limbo, the physical atmosphere becomes more and more polluted. The ability to see clearly is diminished. Here Dante is alerting us to the fact that reliance on our vision, and therefore our perception and interpretation, is going to be tested. In Canto 5 of the Inferno, the second circle, the lustful, Dante encounters two of the best-known contemporary figures of the entire comedy, Francesca and Paolo. Francesca and Paolo were lovers, killed by Francesco's husband, who was Paolo's brother. Francesca and Paolo, the events of this were well known in Dante's time. This is an actual event that took place. What Dante was able to do here was to personalize rather than personify the notion of lustful activity. The fundamental nature of the shades confined in the Inferno, which is turmoil, which is a part of chaos, is shown in conversation with Francesca. Although locked back to back in a whirlwind, a tornado, with Paolo, Francesca never acknowledges Paolo's existence. She is only aware of her own situation, a type of malevolent individualism. She represents all of the characters in the Inferno, self-involved, desiccated, accepting without question external authority, They reveal a lack of awareness of options and possibilities, constricted by their egocentric natures. As Dante and Virgil descend through the subsequent levels of the Inferno, each identifying the supposed punishment for different transgression, they eventually come to the 9th level, which is treachery. Within that, there is treachery to kin, treachery to homeland or party, treachery to guests, and treachery to benefactors. It is at the 4th terrace of the 9th level of the Inferno that one of the most compelling and philosophically defining images comes into the Inferno. Unlike most depictions of Lucifer, and there's an interesting choice of words there, Lucifer and not Satan, as depicting and involved in the origins of interceding evil, Dante depicts Lucifer forever locked not in fire, but in ice. Treachery is represented by the never-ending consumption of Judas, Brutus, and Cassius. Although there's no evidence within the text, I am sure that Dante knew of Plato's assertion regarding the self-conceptive nature of evil. Plato asserts that no one would engage in evil if they understood the harm that it would do to their soul. In this canto, we are presented with a depiction of the consumptive nature of evil, along with its utter futility. Lucifer is as consumed in the lake as is his consumption of the 3 traitors. When Lucifer fans his wings, the resulting wind freezes the lake. Therefore, the action of evil, exemplified by Lucifer fanning his wings, results in his confinement in the lake of ice. Utter futility. And yet Lucifer, like all of the others in the Inferno, accepts without question the circumstances of his confinement. At the midpoint of this canto, Canto 24, one of the most interesting descriptions of conceptual transposition takes place. Once at the center of the Inferno, the journey must continue. To climb out of the Inferno, Virgil takes Dante and begins to climb down. Dante is once again confused because he believes we were going back to the Inferno. I raised my eyes, believing I should see that half of Lucifer that I had left. Instead, I saw him with his legs turned up. Knowing that the journey to continue, they must be able to return to the surface. All movement is now down and out from the center. This ingenious device of spatial transposition alerts the reader to the fact that everything presented in the Inferno is not what it first appears to be. They are distortions, inversions. Everything is upside down. The climb from the Inferno places Dante and Virgil once again on the surface of the earth in the southern hemisphere. As the entire poem is an archetypal journey from ignorance to knowledge, or a movement towards grace, Purgatory depicts the classic ascension journey. While the Inferno depicts the human condition in terms of folly, human selfishness, malevolent individualism, Purgatory sets a different tone. Although the transgressions are the same as in the Inferno, the attitudes of the shades is different. There is still a perception of divine authority, yet there is a shift from isolation and self-deception to the acceptance of personal responsibility. The shades are responsible for their actions while alive, a fundamental existential shift. One of the most important differences between the condition of the shades in the Inferno and Purgatory is the action of cooperation. While the shades in the Inferno are static, unchanging, the shades in Purgatory are dynamic. In the Inferno, the perception of cooperation does not exist, while cooperation is the norm in purgatory. At the summit of purgatory lies the earthly paradise. In Cantos 30 of Purgatory, Virgil departs because he believes that he cannot enter the earthly paradise. He holds to the mindset of all of those in the inferno, as well as those, and all those in limbo as well as those in inferno. He cannot conceptualize the possibility of asking for assistance to move out of limbo. Virgil, representing classical reason that is insufficient to lead him to self-actualization, the self-actualization identified by Aristotle. Before he departs, Virgil gives Dante a final benediction. Virgil tells Dante that he has a renewed will, one that is truly free, and that he may go without fear through the boundary of fire that separates the seventh terrace from the earthly paradise. Yet Dante hesitates. Dante is scared. In the poem, it refers to the fact that he remembers seeing the bodies burned in his youth, which would have been during the plague. Dante hesitates until he knows that Beatrice, the woman that has died and sent him on this journey, is awaiting him on the other side. He goes through the fire, the final sense of purification. Throughout the journey, Dante has been able to assess the difference between the chaotic nature of the inferno and the movement towards cosmos in purgatory. Yet the authentic nature of both realms is still not clear because the journey has not been realized. A limited perspective. It is in Paradiso that cosmos, order, is realized. Purgatory presents a surprisingly existential view of responsibility. The transgressions of those in the inferno and purgatory result from the living of extreme lives. Again, an Aristotelian interpretation. The first two volumes of the poem represent knowable conditions. Although descriptions of exceptional occurrence, both volumes make reference to physical experience. When Dante moves into paradise, he attempts to identify the undefinable and to know the unknowable. As the poem moves towards resolution, Dante presents not only specific Christian philosophical concepts, but a much broader understanding of both chaos and cosmos. As Dante ascends towards the Empyrean, through the celestial spheres, a concept based on Ptolemaic ideas of the universe, he looks back and finds the earth becoming very, very small. As the earth is perceived diminishing in size, so too is the once impressive scale and proportion of the inferno. Located inside the earth, the inferno, upon first encounter, appears enormous and daunting. During his ascent, Dante realizes that the earth itself is only a limited part within the greater whole of existence. The authentic grandeur and the fear of evil's enormity is mitigated by the growing understanding of the singularity of existence. Einsteinian relativist thinking in the 14th century. In the Empyrean, the 10th heaven, Dante, the poet, presents a tour de force of literary, scientific, and philosophical insight. Dante, the pilgrim, is told that the Empyrean is outside of time. Because it is outside of time, it is also outside the normal concept of space. Space has become unbounded. No distinction can be made between one place and another. There is no here and there. There is only here, and here is everywhere. This is a remarkably close concept to what I understand the grand unified field theory of physics being. In this understanding chaos is only an illusion. What is perceived as chaotic, unauthentic knowledge is only a segmented portion of a greater organic whole. We only perceive chaos because we cannot see the total system. Because the Imperium is a grand unified field encompassing all of existence, outside of time and space, Earth, the Inferno, Purgatory, and the 9 preceding heavens are all in the Imperium. The extraordinary revelation is that the Inferno is not outside of paradise, but it is in fact placed in heaven. The chaos, unauthentic knowledge of those in the Inferno and Paradiso exist only because the shades perceive a limited view, a limited interpretation of the organic whole, chaos. They do not see the total system as a single working unity of cosmos. As a result of this misinterpretation, theirs is illusion, theirs is chaos, theirs is punishment. The enigma of the gate inscription, identifying the realm's architecture as being constructed from the highest wisdom and primal love, is resolved. There is no contradiction. Both paradise and the Inferno coexist with paradise in a single unity occupying unbounded time and space. It is only their ability or inability to perceive the authentic, singular working unity of grace, cosmos, that truly differentiates the inhabitants. Abandon hope. Hope is a desired outcome. Hope is a passive rather than an active concept. Abandon hope and achieve realization, because hope is not required. Awareness through intellect replaces chaos, inauthentic understanding, with cosmos, authentic understanding. Those in the Inferno, in chaos, are there because of a limited vision. They choose to see only a fraction of the whole. Their plight is not the result of divine intervention, but rather of plaintive self-delusion. Those in limbo remain there only because they do not understand that they are in paradise. Those who place themselves in purgatory are gaining understanding. Those in paradise experience understanding. They have achieved cosmos unity. In this work, Dante challenges us to step outside our preconceived ideas, our limited perspectives, and find authentic truth, understanding which is unbounded by time and space. Thank you.
There we go. Thomas Aquinas, who was born in 1225, about a century or so before Dante?
Yeah.
Okay. Thomas Aquinas presents us with a philosophy that is manifested and expressed in the Divine Comedy. And the Divine Comedy, in my mind, and after listening to Don, represents a shift in the conceptualization of the authentic relationship between the mind and the body. It moves away from a Platonic view of a strict dualist metaphysics of mind-body, meaning that the mind is separate from the body, the mind or the soul is trapped in the body, so the body acts as a cage for the soul. Instead, Dante's system is a Thomasian rendering of a necessary unity of mind and body to create a composite human who is capable of recognizing, understanding, and living in accord with divine or authentic logic. And that logic makes the human more authentic, right? Now, the thing to remember here is that to be human for St. Thomas Aquinas means that you have an aspect in yourself of perfection. Your soul is a perfect entity, and your soul can know things logically. Its access to logic, its thinking, is in and of itself perfect. Okay, this is the tricky part, because a lot of people don't realize that, how revolutionary Aquinas was being in this. But even though we are a unified body, we are a unified body for a specific purpose. Right? The unification of the mind and body for Aquinas basically means that the body is there to help align the soul, to help bring the soul into the realm of divine logic. And it can only go so far. The revolutionary aspect of Thomas Aquinas has always been the fact that Aquinas put forth all of these proofs of the existence of God, and he basically took them apart. And he said, basically, that as human beings, we can't know with certainty whether or not God exists. We can't. We just can't. We can have faith, but we can't know with certainty. And we can't know with certainty because we are human. It's only after we die and the soul leaves the body that we can be aware fully, that our logic can be fully expressed. But the reason we have a body is so that we can make a choice. You see, without a body, if you are pure logic, there's no choices to be made because you know everything anyway. So there's no choices to be made. You literally know all. You are part of logic. You are part of that Aristotelian movement, that divine kind of movement, that this constant, permanent movement. So when you are human, you don't have the benefit of that omniscience. So you have to make a leap of faith. And that, for Aquinas, is what makes us special. That is what makes us different from animals. That is what makes us different from things without souls. Because we have to make an active choice as to whether or not we want to align ourselves with that divine logic. So if we look at logic as this kind of movement or this kind of force, it really works in well with this idea that Dante has set forward. What we're looking for is an awareness, or an awareness that the capacity to understand the full context of our actions resides in the soul, but the body allows that awareness to be expressed. Awareness of our context equals an awareness of past and present and future. And that awareness can only occur in an authentic humanity. In other words, a humanity that has aligned itself with the will of God in a religious context. Divine love is equated with divine logic for St. Thomas Aquinas and for Dante. All human beings are a result of God's divine love. It is their origin. So when we're looking at the Empyrean, okay, in Paradiso, when we're looking at the Empyrean, it is the kind of source of movement, the source of logic. So what we're trying to do, what we should be doing, is aligning ourselves toward it, right? And so as we bring ourselves into accord with this divine plan, it means that we have to have an awareness that we can return to our origins. And this awareness that we can return to our origins is hope, right? So when we look at the sign over the gates of hell, abandon all hope, ye who enter here. Okay, lasciate ogni speranza, voi che entrate. Okay, lasciate, pull from yourself, rip this hope. And in so doing, you are wrenching yourself from divine logic. You are wrenching yourself away from it. And that is why sin in the Inferno is so centered in the body, because it's only through the body that you can turn away. It's only through the body that you can wrench yourself outside of that divine logic. So when we're looking at that divine logic, the other side of this, ignorance, there's really no sin as much as what Don was saying. There's ignorance. And so if we look at it as ignorance, an authentic intelligence is an awareness of our place in the divine plan and an active movement in accord with it, fully utilizing our human manifestation of our mind and body, fully understanding that unity. Ignorance is an awareness of heaven, but an inability to move in accord with it, or an unawareness of exactly how to do so. So if we translate that, sin then would be an active turning away from divine logic, an abandonment of one's natural accordance with divine will. So in many ways, sin here is almost an act of hubris, to believe that you, yourself, without some kind of divine intervention, without an awareness of that logic, can make your own choices and still come out on top. And that you can embrace, and that's why if you look at, when you look at where the sinners are, the sins on top are sins of incontinence. They're sins of lust and greed, just things that, easy things that you don't really think about. Your body is pulled to them, okay? And this is also plays in this role. What we have, and something that really makes this much easier to think about, which is something I should have said in the beginning. I'm just realizing that now. But the thing that makes this easier to understand is that in this time period, including from, actually all the way from Plato, all the way up to, I'd say close to the mid-1700s, the idea is that emotions, passions, reside in the body. They have nothing to do with the mind. Passions are resident in the body. The mind is pure. The intellect can know itself fully. The intellect can be fully aware of itself. Passions, emotions get in the way. So if those passions are centered in the body, those are the things that if we give in to them, can kind of get us off course, kind of impede us. So this idea that sinning, or this active turning away, is on one level, there's sins of incontinence, which are just giving in to your body, where you're not really just like, okay, I really want that, gluttony, wrath, right? And it makes sense, because when you get mad, right, you don't get mad here, you get mad here. You get mad down, and you feel it rising, okay? You feel that anger coming up. And even with gluttony, right? Hunger comes from down here, okay? And we don't have to talk about lust, okay? You know where that rises from. So the idea here is that it's the sins, the more serious sins in the inferno are the sins that are a kind of unity, but a perverted unity of mind and body, where you're using your own idea of logic, your own sense, a self-serving logic, to try to enact your own will. So treachery to benefactors is something that takes a lot of thought. It takes a lot of flattery. It takes almost every human gift that you could possibly have. And it has the most consequence to others, because treachery means that you have to turn other people as well. You have to use other people. You have to get other people to sin for you to make your sin that much greater. So it's an aspect of this perversion of divine logic, which is a selfless logic. And this becomes a selfish logic. So when we see in Dante's Divine Comedy the inscription over hell, okay, abandon all hope, shows that the sinner is fully responsible for actively and knowingly turning away from or rejecting divine logic. But as we've noted, as we've seen, that is also an illusion, right? So the sinner is doubly blind, thinks that the actions that they're doing are their own doing, not realizing it on about 2 or 3 different levels. Okay, so as we said before, the severity of the punishment judged by whether or not the rejection of that logic was active or passive, and how much thought went into the rejection itself. Right? So when you betray a benefactor, you have to be aware that the person's a benefactor. You have to be aware that you can get stuff out of it. You have to be aware that you are going back on and rejecting their good nature towards you. Okay? And you have to use your intellect to do it. Right? So hell, as an inversion of divine logic, it's an active rejection of the unity of the mind and body. Even though you're using your body to do what you will, you're doing what you want to do. You are doing what the self wants. And what the self wants, it doesn't matter. It's what you should want, what logic wants. And logic wants for nothing. So aligning yourself with this logic is the way to go. Rejecting that logic, either being blind to it or actively trying to usurp it, is where these sinners, that's how they get into hell, is because as an act of hubris. Okay? So the self that the sinners have, the self that the ignorant have, is really an inauthentic self. It is not a real self by Thomasian standards. Now you have to remember, of course, Thomas Aquinas, he was a priest, he was a professor, okay? Professor and a priest, worst of both worlds, okay? And he himself was, of course, he had an agenda. But the interesting thing about Aquinas here is that he rediscovers Aristotle. The church at this point is very Platonic. The church at this point in history they only had, after the collapse of the Roman Empire, the church in Rome had access to Plato and Socrates. The Eastern churches, or what was left in the East, that's where Aristotle was. So Jewish and Muslim scholars had access to Aristotle. So Aquinas, being kind of the rebel that he was reading things he shouldn't have been reading. He was reading theologians, Jewish and Muslim theologians. And he was reading, or Jewish and Arab theologians, and he was reading their stuff. And he kept seeing this reference to the great thinker, the great teacher. And the great teacher was Aristotle. And he finally, as a good researcher will do, he dug to see who the source was. And the source was Aristotle. And it's that movement, suddenly he realizes, because as I say in my classes, when it comes to Aquinas, right, how can you be a good person? I mean, why would we all be trapped in these bodies? How could these bodies be evil in and of themselves, as had been the kind of perversion of Plato by the church, right? How could these bodies be evil in and of themselves when these are the things that allow us to do good, right? If you're going to worship, you can't just worship with your mind. If you're Catholic and you're going to receive a sacrament, that's the deal with a sacrament, is that it is a physical thing. You go through the physical rituals. Most importantly, though, denominations aside, even religious views aside, how else are you going to do good works? How else are you going to serve others? How else are you going to show compassion? You don't show compassion with your mind. You show compassion through your active movement, right? And this is something that Aquinas couldn't wrap his head around this. So this is why he liked this idea of unity. And on the whole, on the other end of this, the complete polar opposite of this, if you go all the way down at the end of the Inferno, and you see Satan. Satan is trapped in ice, and there's wings, his wings are flapping. And it's creating the wind in hell, because there's this wind that's constantly kind of blowing. And the flapping of his wings is completely pointless. It is a useless, pointless action. He can't get away. And the wind that's produced, in my opinion, the wind that's produced is a perversion of divine logic. And because it is physical movement rather than logical movement. So the wind that blows through hell is a kind of inversion or perversion of a physical manifestation of the movement of divine logic. So that completes kind of the circle. And as we see this physical manifestation of movement rather than a mental or logical one, this is why all of the souls in hell, all of their punishments are punishments of repeated physical action or based solely in the physical, because that's what they're going to feel. That's what they're going to know. That's all they can know, right? And the souls in hell don't make any sense. I mean, the great thing about the souls in hell is that if you gave them a chance to do it all over again, they totally would. Knowing exactly what's going on, skin getting ripped off, cut in half, right? Disemboweled, decapitated, boiled in shit, okay? I mean, that happens,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
All of these things, right? And Dante goes to talk to them, and they're just as wrathful and angry and just as awful as they were before. And basically implying that if I had the chance to do it all over again, I still would, right? And you have that Milton-esque movement. That's why Milton comes much later, right? That movement, Milton comes much later, right? The movement of I'd rather, rule over hell than serve in heaven, right? That's not Aquinas, not at all. Because there's all a bunch of little Lucifers in hell that would much rather have their little kingdom of shit. Okay? So this idea here that this journey out of hell requires an inversion. It requires a flipping of logic that Don talked about. When Dante and Virgil leave hell, they have to invert themselves. They have to flip over. Because hell, the logic is upside down. The logic doesn't make sense. It's inverted logic. Then you get to Purgatory, and you have an interesting dynamic where there's an ignorance of process, right? So there's an ignorance of how Purgatory exactly works, but there's an understanding of a result. There's an understanding that this means something, that this goes someplace, that this will do something. That's like the beginning of logic. It's the beginning of an awareness that there is a point to this. There is a sense. Now, the souls in Purgatory are not completely enlightened yet. So they're still working this through with their bodies, but what they're working through with their bodies is a place where it's going to get their minds. Right? So all of the things that they're doing are also versions of things that you would do on earth. They're also versions of supplication on earth, versions of worship on earth. So there's still room for hope in Purgatory. There's still room for the idea that this comes to a logical conclusion, that this movement moves towards something. And so for me, Purgatory represents a present moment, okay? It's almost like hell keeps going back over the past. Hell keeps going back over the sin that you did. Whereas Purgatory places you in a present, kind of, but with an awareness of a future, okay? And it's a present where a realization can take place. You see, that's what the souls in Purgatory need, is they need a realization. They need to come to an awareness. And that's why their souls aren't completely free yet. Free, we all know that's all in one place, but their souls aren't free yet because they need that physical space. They need that place where logic can move. They need that place where they can physically understand how things work. They need to get from point A to point B. All right? They can't realize yet that they're all in the same point. They're all in the same singularity. They're on the right trajectory toward heaven. They're moving toward that logic or aligning themselves with it. And then when we get to paradise, in paradise, all thought is in accord with divine logic and movement. And I just want to see if there's I had these up here. No, leave them. So the idea here is that all thought is in accord with a divine logic and movement. The souls are aligned with this logic that even though I'm describing it as movement, it doesn't physically move. It is in and of itself thought. It is in and of itself understanding. There's nothing left to understand but the understanding itself, which is very similar to Aristotle's prime mover. The prime mover in Aristotle, it very much looks like God in Thomasian philosophy, and there's a reason for that. But the Aristotelian prime mover was not anthropomorphic. The Aristotelian prime mover didn't feel, didn't love, didn't do anything. It just was thought. It was all movement, and it was logical movement, and it was everything. You couldn't have any logic without the prime mover, the first cause of everything. So in the way that kind of Aquinas kind of brings this into a religious realm is to link this logic with love, to say that this logic is an all-encompassing love. And thought without a body is perfect. There's nothing to limit it. The souls are in complete union with divine movement. And toward the end, when Dante says, my wings were too weak for that, when he's trying to understand the enormity, he's trying to understand the cosmos in its entirety. And he still can't. And he can't because he's still human. And he's brought to see this, and he can see only as far as his intellect can go. And his intellect can only go that far because he is still human. But he understands at least how he should be positioned. He understands at least where he needs to be and how he needs to act in relation to that while he is a fully authentic human being. One that knows itself, that knows its own intellect fully, but can't express that intellect fully because that intellect is still within a body. But you do the best you can. And that is where, when you have Thomas Aquinas, the strength of that philosophy and why it's so present in the Divine Comedy is because there is this keen awareness, not just of the limitations of the body, but actually an inverting of the Platonic idea. And that is to say that the body can, in many ways, let that intellect fully manifest itself in the realm of the physical. Because the intellect by itself can't express itself in the realm of the physical. But the body can allow it to do so. And that is the truly philosophically revolutionary aspect of Aquinas, is that he very, very subtly raises humanity by saying, yeah, everybody's soul is perfect. Everybody's intellect is perfect. And you are special, we are special, because we have the capacity to choose, to say yes or to say no. For Aquinas, we have the capacity to choose faith, or we have the capacity to turn away from that faith. In the secular world, where Aquinas is so important, is he allows René Descartes to say that, no, we can have certainty here too. but not before Aquinas can establish that we have perfect logic in our heads already. So, that's all. Thank you.